I'm Christy Skevington. I'm here with Haggerty Consulting, so just here to support the Oregon Department of Energy today. And I just, bear with us, they're really trying. I'll just say this all in advance. Please bear with us as we try to make this a virtual and in-person event, and make this as inclusive as possible.
I definitely did not, and I'm also not on the team.
Are you? Yeah, great. Test.
Trying this one more time. Okay. I don't hear any feedback, so I think we're okay. All right, thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Obviously, doing the remote in person is always a little bit of a challenge, so thank you. But we're happy you're here today. We're happy that everyone who is joining us virtually is here as well. So I'm Christy Skevington. I'm here with Haggerty Consulting, supporting the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm hoping that everything else will clear us. But we will find out if we can't. So just to kind of go through the agenda today, or maybe should I hold until we have the slides up? Give it a second. I'll give it a second. Maybe what we can do, just to kind of buy time, is to go around and do some of the introduction now. We did want to go around the room and just see what brings you here today, what your name is, what your organization is, and just kind of what you're most interested in learning. So why don't we start with that? I hear myself a little bit, but everyone's ready to go.
So much technology now.
It's very future forward right now.
Welcome to the future.
Yes. Rob, do we want to start with you and we'll just go around?
Sure. Rob Belmar, I'm a senior policy analyst at OGO, and I'm lead for standing up the program that we're putting together, the District Resilience Grant from USDA. So I'll be working on this probably through end of June, July, get it all the pieces put together, and pass it off to our programs team to run it. Make it fun. So, see the timing.
Rick Williams, Oregon Applied Research, and graduate faculty at Florida State University, teaching strategies for resilience.
Fantastic. Any particular interest in today's session? Anything that you're hoping to get out of this?
Yes, the continuity of essential services for communities, and who's responsible for that?
Okay, fantastic.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emma Solneri. I'm with ODO. I am one of two grants officers that we have here now, and I'll be working with Rob to help get the program submitted to the U.S. Department of Energy and going from there. I'm Sarah Murphy. I am the community navigator for ODO, and it's my second day of work, so I'm here.
I'm Angela Singleton. I'm the American for member survey with Odo this year. I coordinate things between you sooner.
Keith Brooks, I'm the general manager of Douglas Electric Cooperative, located outside of Roseburg, serve a lot of rural communities, and we are just trying to figure out how we can build the most resilient system with a very limited customer base to spread those costs across. So we see this as a huge opportunity to bring really valuable services to our community and just want to take part in the process.
Fantastic, thank you.
I'm Phil DeGuerre from Douglas Electric as well. I'm the Assistant General Manager. I'm here for the same reasons as he is, and I'm specifically interested in making sure that we're well aware of all of the program requirements and, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and sure that we're doing everything in accordance with the way we need to do it to ensure that we get proper funding and get to keep it.
That's okay. Which actually prompts me to ask, I see handouts. Did everyone get a copy of handouts that they're interested in for the federal rules and regulations? Dr. Chief.
Hi, everyone. Ruchi Sudhir. I'm at Oregon Department of Energy Associate Director for Strategic Engagement. And I get to work with everyone here. And I'm really glad to see you all in person and glad that there's folks joining online as well.
Hi, I'm Ellen Shepherd. I'm an outreach manager with Energy Trust Oregon New Buildings Program. And I work with public projects, and I'm just kind of want to hear what's happening with the grid resilience and how that might connect up with buildings potentially that I work with.
Good morning, my name is Brittany Davidson. I'm with the Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association, and I'm here today to learn a little bit more about the program so that we can help our members who are interested in.
Fantastic.
I'm Ted Case. I'm the executive director of the Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association. As Brittany said, we have 18 electric co-ops in the state. All of them are interested in this. We got some here today, a person I suspect some online. So here to learn. Thank you.
Hi, Hannah Don Kaplan. I'm with Bonneville Power, and I'm the Oregon liaison to the state. So just here to learn, what's going on and see where maybe we're overlapping and just what our customers are going to be doing.
Findings is for me, and incentives programs, and learning what's coming my way next while.
I'm Jennifer Jolly. I'm with the Oregon Municipal Electric Utilities Association, and we have 11 city-owned, consumer-owned utilities like co-ops, and work closely with that group. And just again, looking to see what the requirements are and whether cities would be good candidates for some of these grants.
I'm Nick from Odo IT, here to make sure that people can see the video.
Good morning, I'm Katie Toski. I work with Christy at Haggerty Consulting, and we're really honored to be supporting Odo in this initiative. And it's a real pleasure to meet all of you this morning. Thank you for being here.
All right, so I think if we're all good to move forward, we can move into the agenda and just some of the.
Can we hear who's online too?
Oh, we can. I know we did ask them to put all of their information in the chat, and we can.
We're not signed in though, I don't think.
Yeah.
I was just trying to see, I'm not on the WebEx.
We might be able to just read off the chat and just,
Let's do that. Okay. Katie, do you wanna? Yeah.
I have the same question.
Okay, so joining us virtually, we have Tom McFarland from the City of Ashland Electric Utility, Lee Elder from Pacific Core, Janine Benner, Director of Odo, Faith Yorba from Sustainable Northwest, Tegan DeBolt from Eugene Water and Electric Board, Austin Jackson from Consumers Power, Brooke Brownlee from Portland General Electric, Keith Foreman from City of Forest Grove Light and Power, Mel Boyd from Idaho Power, Jenny, who's one of the communications team members from Odo, Lynn Ansell from Idaho Power, Clint Mills from Idaho Power, Robert Wallace from Wasco County, and Jason Hooser, I hope I'm saying that correct, from Eugene Water and Electric. Christina Medina from Pacific Core, and that looks to be the group from Honey Virtually.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we do have a lot to cover today, and just to kind of go through some of the housekeeping notes. First, we want to make sure you do understand how this grid resilience funding works and the narrative that Odo recently submitted to the U.S. Department of Energy, based in a large part on feedback we've received from people in this room and people on the chat, so thank you very much. This approach was developed over the past year in close consultation with OPUC, and it was informed by outreach and experts working in the space. Second, and most importantly, today, we would love your input and feedback to continue to improve our program design, such as community benefits. I know that came up today as an interest, so we'll be talking about that. The competitive scoring criteria used to evaluate those competitive projects and lessons learned from past projects that you've all implemented in the past. So we just want to align this work with what is already being done with utilities and others, and to better meet the objectives outlined in the federal funding opportunity. And then third, I know there was interest in this as well, and as we've mentioned, there are handouts here for all of the federal rules and regulations. We've also posted them on the website, so they're available for those virtually if you're interested in following along. But rules and applications regarding Davis-Bacon, NEPA, Justice 40, and Buy America, Build America as well. And I think that's what this we can move forward. And then just for everyone on the chat, to do a little bit of housekeeping as well, for those of you who are new to WebEx, there's a quick guide with some features. So attendees are off camera and they are muted, but we do have a host who will be able to unmute you if you have questions. You can see the option to raise your hand on both of the screens. So you can put questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and we have people from Odo and from Haggerty both kind of monitoring this to make sure that we get to everyone's questions. So feel free to use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. We just ask that you please send this to all the participants so that everyone can see, and it's a group discussion that will facilitate. I think that covers it for housekeeping. And just know, because we are trying to facilitate, and as you've already witnessed, kind of virtual, in person, and we really want to hear feedback from everyone. We'll foster discussion, but if we need to kind of move along in the essence of time, we'll just raise our hand and just say, what's your final thought, to keep it moving so that we can show you for everyone. And I think with that, any last questions in terms of how this will flow today? Otherwise, I'm going to hand it over to Rob. Okay. Sorry, Richie, please pass it off to Richie.
So many of you might have seen this slide before, but just in case, kind of our duty to make sure you know how this all fits together. Really big thanks to our consultants here from Haggerty, as well as all of you for doing our open house. If you don't know me, my name is Ruchi Sevier. I'm Associate Director for Strategic Engagement here at Odo. So as you heard, you're going to hear a little bit about how we got to the point we're at, with, what brought us through the process. And I'm actually really excited to hear from all of you, some examples, projects that you're working on, or how you think about community benefits, and to really inform how we take this program to the next iteration of developing criteria, and help us think about how to do sort of a selection process as well. This slide over here talks about our mission. It's a little introduction to Odo if you don't know. We are here to help Oregonians to make informed decisions to maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. Under what we do, you'll see kind of the way that we meet the mission, and there's a lot of programs and divisions here at Odo. Exciting. We have a big report that we do every year. We run programs that Kanye manages with that the legislature has assigned to us. And for this funding opportunity that we're talking about today, it will be a new energy program at Odo that's federally funded, and it will help to support a resilient and affordable energy system that kind of links back to our mission. Next slide, please. This is another sort of orienting slide with picture after the passage of both the IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act. Odo recognized that the state would be receiving millions of dollars from the federal government. And the purpose of that is to invest in clean energy, energy efficiency, resilience, and other important priorities. We did a number of public webinars and we discussed with our energy advisory work group early when these laws first passed. And we developed these guiding principles on this slide to help us figure out how to prioritize and how to think about all of the funding that's coming our way. So I won't read these all in detail, but we're basically focusing on equity, including geographic diversity, coordination with tribal governments, where possible, providing technical assistance, focusing on cross-agency partnerships where, we work with QEQ and QC quite a bit. So focusing on those partnerships to help us with expertise. And then finally, taking advantage of every high priority funding opportunity, but also ensuring that we're having the quality work that puts at every available dollar that's best use. So that might mean we might not go to every single funding opportunity, but we want to try to balance that with these guiding principles here. And so you'll hopefully notice in our discussion today that we're applying many of these guiding principles with this funding opportunity as well. Okay, I think that's it for me, and I'll pass it back to Christine.
Sure. So I think we already handled the group introductions for today, so we can actually keep moving forward and move on to the next slide.
Did we want to introduce somebody online?
I think we did earlier, but is there anyone else who joined that? Or is there anyone that we missed?
Couple additionally, we've got Ray from Tribal One, Kyle from Energy Trust of Oregon, Jessica Rikers from Technology and Policy Manager at Odo, Jim Kreider from the Oregon Rural Action, and a member of the Environmental Justice Council, Christine Golightly from Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, Natasha Jackson from Northwest Gas Association, Sarah Walker from Pacificor, and I believe those are the recent additions. So,
And then we also have Whitney Dorr from DEQ, as I mentioned.
Oh, great.
Thank you. And then next we'll just kind of pop into where all of this funding came from really quickly. I know many of you are already familiar with it and have maybe attended some of our other webinars before. But it's a quick refresher on where this funding came from, and then we'll jump into the meat of why we're here. The program is funded under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This piece of legislation includes $62 billion for U.S. Department of Energy to deliver a more equitable, clean energy future for the American people by investing in American manufacturing and workers, expanding access to energy efficiency and clean energy for families, communities, and businesses, delivering reliable, clean, and affordable power to more Americans, and building the technologies of tomorrow with clean energy demonstrations. And the purpose of these funds, as outlined by the U.S. Department of Energy, is to improve all hazard resilience on the electrical grid against disruptive events, generate the greatest community benefit in reducing the likelihood and consequences of disruptive events, advance Department of Energy's equity, environmental, and energy justice priorities, including the Justice 45 initiative, which we'll talk about a little more later, and invest in America's workforce. So the application to the U.S. Department of Energy was already submitted on April 18th. We were required to submit that request to the Department of Energy by May 31st, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule there. And that was for the first two allocations of funding for the federal program. Under the program, states, tribes, and territories apply directly to the federal government. And then once awarded, these grant recipients can then run processes to issue subawards to entities eligible as subrecipients, such as electric grid operators, electricity storage operators, electricity generators, transmission owners or operators, distribution providers, and fuel suppliers. Odo is the state agency that will apply for, receive, and administer these funds, and it is our intent to focus on electrical utilities. And then finally, the legislation contemplates allocations over 5 years. And the Department of Energy intends to issue the first and second allocations of funding at the same time. accounting for the extended application deadline that they gave us. The first two allocations for the state are listed on the slide, both a little less than $10 million. We're required to pass 95% of these funds through to our sub-grantees. And the program does have two match requirements. First, the state or tribes are required to provide a 15% match. And then secondly, subrecipients are required to provide a match as well. Subrecipients will be required to match a rate of either 100% or 1/3, depending on their electricity sales in the previous year. And that is the background, so I'll pass it back over to Rob to go through the process.
Can you answer, do you know if the state match, is that tied up in the state legislature pulled up with the Republican walkout? So there is no state match yet, is that correct?
It was tied in with our budget, I believe, so it's tied in with that, and maybe Rich can talk more to that point.
Yeah, so our budget is out of the house, but it's all in our budget, so we can get you the specifics of where it is, but the state match is identified in the budget. So as long as the budget passes eventually, then our state match.
At some point, can you discuss what the utility match can consist of, whether in-kind services or other flavors of funding?
Sure.
I believe that both of those are acceptable. I know that our match is going to be a net cash match.
All right, so I'm just gonna give a brief history of how we got to.
Make sure, is there any questions in the chat based on what Emily covered?
No questions yet.
Okay, thank you.
Good thinking. Yeah. So yeah, I'll share a little bit of the brief history for how we got to the narrative that we submitted in April. We began work on this program last summer, and we developed a draft program narrative that was based solely on wildfire mitigation projects. And since then, we've done a lot of listening and a lot of outreach, and that's significant changes, including expanding the eligible measures to any natural hazard mitigation projects, not just wildfire. We've done public hearings again in March, and we had a request for information where we got some valuable feedback from utilities on the types of projects that we think we're going to see in the program. And the result is that we made some significant changes to the narrative. And we also resulted in a change in the way that we distribute the funds between small and large utilities, and we'll get that a little closer here in a minute. The funding for the large and small utilities are based on a share of customer sales in the state. And we have a table to look at that in the next slide. But the other thing we did for small utilities was remove that maximum project award, which was originally proposed at $600,000. And so we took that cap away and allowed a little bit more flexibility for those projects. We also built some flexibility into the way that disadvantaged communities are described in the program. Just a reminder that this is what we've submitted to USDOE as an application. And so we're waiting feedback for them to see how much flexibility we actually have with these things. But that's what we proposed in the narrative. Next slide, please.
Could you just, or perhaps you're gonna discuss it later, the disadvantaged communities, how you changed the description or where is it different?
Sure. So we have federal guidance in the form of a map. And that map highlights areas that are clearly defined as disadvantaged communities in the state. We have a slide for that later.
Okay.
But we've also, in our narrative, said that if you're outside of that map and you want to make a case for certain communities or populations to be considered a disadvantaged community, that we would like to let communities make their own case. And that's where we're waiting for some, see what the federal response is to that part of the narrative. So, so this is a budget summary showing the close to 20 million that Emily mentioned, the 95% that goes to projects. we did the math and found that 25% of customers in the state are served by small utilities, with federal definitions. And that's the minimum number that we would have to hit for funding in the program. And in our narrative, we proposed to carve out 40% for these small utilities, going from a little over 5.5 million originally proposed to a little over 7.5 million for small utilities. Again, we removed the cap for utility maximum award. Next slide, please. Also in the narrative, we highlight our program objectives. Number 1 is to mitigate natural hazard risks. Number 2 is deliver benefits to disadvantaged communities. 3 is maximize broad community benefits that complement the grid resilience projects. And finally, just to continue to learn as we operate the program and update these objectives as we go along in future years of funding.
Are those weighted all the same or?
That's what we're going to work on today, is the criteria of how we weight. Yeah, we're going to hopefully develop criteria today for in the narrative, we adopted the full list of eligible measures that are provided in the federal guidance. So next slide. This is a slightly abbreviated list from the federal guidance document. Measures like utility pole management, vegetation management, reconductoring, undergrounding, grid hardening measures. About 2/3 of the way down, you'll see there's an asterisk on microgrids and batteries. Those are eligible technologies under the program, but we have another program at ONO that will fund those. And the feedback that we got from utilities was to focus more on the grid hardening and less on the microgrids. And so that's going to be our focus in the first 2 rounds. I'd also like to point out the last measure, so the last bullet here, new generation and cybersecurity are not included in this program. And so new generation includes solar, wind, generation projects that could be tied to a microgrid project. And now I will pass it back to you, Christine.
Sure. So just to foster some group discussion on this, and we'll discuss this a little bit and then we'll move on both in the chat if you have comments or in person. But as you review the eligible measures for this program, are there any that stand out to you as most interesting or kind of compelling in terms of projects that you are running in?
We'll go back to the list.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we'll give everyone a moment to just. Yes,
I really like the list in general. I think the development of this list, and obviously a lot of thought went into it. I'm going to speak for our system just because that's what I know. Relocation, reconductoring of power lines, very important to us. Vegetation management and fuel load management is very important to us. We have 1,600 miles of power lines that crisscross some of the most rugged service territory, surrounded, 30-foot right-of-ways surrounded by 150-foot trees. So anything that we can do to mitigate that risk, it doesn't really matter whether it's fire or snow or anything goes, or wind, that's when those trees go down. So I like the middle part of that list a lot. Only speaking from my viewpoint. As you evaluate some of this stuff, I would think that folks in the city may go months and months and months without an outage. Folks in the country, they may go weeks, sometimes days, depending on where they live. So I think it needs to be weighted that way a little bit. Again, just speaking for me. As you're considering that list, looking at the actual reliability statistics of the areas that are impacted by it. If you're aiming at a more resilient grid, then the places that are out more should get a lot more.
Thank you.
So I'm looking at that distributed energy resources, including microgrids and batteries, and there's an asterisk. What does the asterisk refer to?
That is referring to another program that we have at ODO that funds microgrids, including solar, which is known as the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program.
Yeah.
It's got the same amount of funding as this program. It focuses on microgrids and renewable energy. And for that reason, we're steering this program more away from microgrids and towards the grid hardening. And so while it's an eligible measure of the program, it's not going to be a priority within scoring criteria unless we decide as a group that we want to change that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Rob, is it also true that in the sum part of it, that it's clear that this funding cannot be used for certain measures like the purchase of solar panels? So it's
Yeah.
more like complementary measures, is that right?
Yeah, so that sum is qualifying that last bullet where new generation is not included. But batteries on their own can be considered a distributed energy resource, and the program will provide batteries, but not new generation.
As we look at the high consequence extreme events that have occurred over the last several years, large geographic areas are shut down, dead bust, as part of the preemptive public safety power shutoffs. When this program helped utilities designed for intentional islanding, like Cougar Dam was brought back online and islanded in the heat of battle. So can this program help BPA and the Corps and utilities come up with contingency plans that when a wildfire is coming through a particular area or an ice storm or whatever, they can, isolate the threatened areas without losing power to large swaths of the country?
Yeah, so the monitoring and control technology would include fusing and circuit reclosers and all sorts of grid control technologies. Maybe some of our utility partners can speak to that a little bit.
To a degree, that's kind of hard to do the way our system organ is structured, and so much of my power, the bottom of the system. So it's, for example, we can't island off. It's hard for us to island off portions of our system because there's no other source of power. You could island out stuff. So we don't have generation internally to be able to say, take this second off, but we can backfeed through here because we have our own generation. But building more transition to be able to have looped feeds and other feeds, that definitely would help them. But we don't have a lot of, I guess, what we call distributed generation.
I know Pacific Northwest National Labs is working on how to island small hydro.
Yeah.
Working with BTA and the Corps and BLM. So that might be something to explore.
Yeah, good idea.
But one thing, we had a 100% system outage in 2019 due to a snowstorm. And one thing we found out pretty quickly is that folks didn't have communications infrastructure, didn't have enough reliable backup to stay on. So we not only did we lose power, we kind of went dark and now one system went down because generator that thought was fueled wasn't fueled or possibly didn't start. I can't remember the exact thing. This could help folks harden the communications infrastructure and provide reliable backup power so you can communicate, because that got to be it's pretty hard to stand a system back up when no one can talk on.
Excellent idea.
We have
Kind of on the same lines of that, could this fund any sort of backup power for individual residences?
Not for as individual residences, but something like emergency response and communications. That's probably an instance where this program could look at batteries and put them in a positive competitive light within the matrix if that's what the group decides we want to do. So that's a good example of where standalone batteries would bring a lot of value outside of the discussion of microgrids and solar and stuff, but just battery backups for communications.
Well, I think at times as a utility, electric utility, we get a tendency a little bit of tunnel vision, but one thing that snowstorm taught us was all the other utilities rely on us as well for clean water, wastewater treatment, firefighting, all of those without electricity, they don't work.
Right.
So, having a resilient grid is beneficial, but also then having the ability to stand alone for short periods of time while things are being rebuilt, I think is very important for folks to consider as well.
So could the resilience hub concept be supported by this? Or like a community center, it's not an individual, but a community center would be able to support the essential services?
That would probably go through our CREP program. A resilience hub would much more likely go through that funding path. Because this could not, for example, buy the solar or energy generation for the site. And the feedback we've had pretty overwhelmingly from utilities is to focus on the more traditional grid reliability measures. And there's other pots of funding that are focusing on resilient hubs. And so we've got good opportunities to fund those, just not through this program.
And most utilities at our headquarters, we have backup generators to keep things online, but one, not for this pool, but another grant I'm working is solar with battery storage to limit having to actually start the generator. We can run for short outage times off of our battery storage and not have to start the generator. That's great. Or to provide, and then we also, as part of that, we provide a community gathering place for folks near us, because we're near low income housing and some little mobile home trailer parks and things. It'd be a place for folks to come and stay warm and or stay cool and get water and those kind of things. Not for this program, but for another grant.
We have a couple of questions from folks participating virtually. I want to make sure we fit it too. So we've got a question on resources to help rural counties plan so they can participate in these programs. I know something that we've talked about is potential technical assistance, and we've also drafted a number of written documents that will be available to provide guidance. But are there any additional thoughts on that?
My understanding is that this does not provide planning funds, that it's construction grants, and Emily, you know otherwise. My understanding is that it really is construction projects, plus a piece around workforce. And so planning, that's another thing that we can do through the CREP program. We have planning funds. There's also a bill this session that if it passes, provides funds to counties for planning. So there are resources heading in that direction, but again, not in this program.
And then a follow-on backup power. Would programs for any customer-owned backup generators be eligible? And I think we covered this with some of the previous questions.
Yeah, customer-owned resources, no, within this program. The only eligible applicants are electric utilities in Oregon.
Can you speak to, you're seeking our feedback, what jumps out at you from this list? How are you going to use this input from this open house? Because you've already submitted your application and presumably, so are you just trying to get some of the fine details, or are you trying to rank based on our comments what you're going to say is the highest use of these types of projects? You're going to say, for example, Douglas likes, reconductoring, so we should move that up on the list in terms of projects to be funded, or how are you going to use this open house information that you're gathering, I guess?
Yeah, so we're starting with these sort of broad discussions to get an idea of the types of projects that we're going to see. And we'll actually talk about some specific projects in a couple of slides. And we want to focus that as we go through today so that in another hour or less, we're actually creating a list of selection criteria with the weight for how the competitive review process is going to go in this program. So that's what we want to build today is the competitive selection criteria, get a hierarchy for how that looks. We've got some proposed broad categories for those criteria that we'll look at and talk about. But really, right now is our blank page for criteria. And that's where we're going with all of this, is to establish that competitive review process.
So, Rob, I'm terrible at math here, so can you level set me here? So we have, as I understand it, we have $9 million, right, year one.
$19 million.
For year one is right now 9.9.
And we get both years in the first
Okay, but
2 years.
all right, so hear me out. So for the COU end, which I'm most interested, that's 40% of 9 million, year one, right?
Yeah.
So that's 3.9 million. That's Brittany's math, not mine, so she's wrong.
We could go back to that budget.
Can we do that? Because I'm gonna make a point here about, all right, so let's just say year one, right? It's 9 million. Right, that was somewhere.
Yes, 9 million.
9 million, so 40%, 3.9 is the COU portion of it. Right?
And we're actually gonna make both years available in year one, if that's.
Okay, all right, so I guess my point, I'm trying to figure out, and then we have the estimated number of small utility awards, so 10. So we got rid of the cap, but when you have something like undergrounding, which was on your list, which is great, super expensive. So I'm trying to just figure out what's the realistic number for a utility like Douglas that's, obviously offers some feedback here. Somebody brings in, somebody could bring in an undergrounding project that's a big chunk of that. Obviously, you want 10 awards, but what are you looking at? I know you got rid of the cap. So
What's the narrative? We described a target cap of up to around 800,000, but with flexibility, we didn't want to ink it. But yeah, around 700 to 800,000 would give us the 10 in this first year of funding. And you're right, measures like undergrounding, you're not going to do a lot of undergrounding.
No.
And so what we heard from some of the utilities in our request for information was, monitoring, wildfire monitoring, in some cases doing new fusing and controls, putting new conductors that are a little more tree hardened on poles, doing some new poles. So I think we'll see a variety of measures. And if someone came in with, $6 billion worth of undergrounding, they're probably not going to get funded because we want to spread the money around. Yeah,
that's it. Thank you.
yeah.
So I know we're getting ready to kind of move on into the next stage. I am wondering, let's keep moving. This is a very nice segue into what we want to talk about next, which is competitive selection criteria, but I think we do want to just pause and go through some thoughts on community benefits. Once again, this is all feeding into what the competitive selection criteria will ultimately be. So we could either pause here and just kind of keep moving on or jump to the competitive selection criteria, depending on how the conversation is going.
Yeah, I think we could talk briefly about community benefits, then we'll hear from some utilities on specific project examples to just get us thinking about the types of projects. And then, we'll move right into the competitive review process and, we've got a little over now. So thanks for moving this along. This slide is really meant as a resource slide for everyone to see how the federal guidelines define community benefits. Basically, they direct states and tribes to administer grant funds in a manner that prioritizes projects with the greatest community benefits based on the core policy areas in the federal guidelines, which include labor, workforce, community engagement, advancing equitable outcomes, and implementing Justice 40 goals. And so here's another group of questions, and we just want to put these questions up as things to think about as we hear some utility examples of projects. And again, this is another piece that we're looking for guidance on. There's a lot of discussion of these community benefits within the federal guidance language, but we have to define those for ourselves, and we're looking for, how do we define community benefits in this program?
I would say just off the first one there that, many of these are just gonna be done in-house by our crews. We're not gonna have, it's not like a big generation project. Well, you're gonna bring a bunch of, union workforce to do these things. So I think you need to be really realistic on that point, that these are pretty much, in-house utility type projects, is my guess.
Yeah, right, at that funding rate, even with the match. She's correct, and I'm not sure if you're aware of, honestly, what labor costs are for line workers. In Oregon, around $60 an hour. Make double time and overtime, and the benefit load is probably 75% of that. So you're talking $2 a minute. That's on overtime. So, it's expensive work, unfortunately.
The gentleman from Douglas articulated something that I think is really important. Governments often have continuity of government plans, and they're internally focused. And utilities and public works have continuity of operations plans, and they're internally focused. What community benefit to me means is a community-focused continuity of essential services plan. And as he described, how do you keep drinking water, sanitation, heat, warming, cooling, food preparation, communications, keeping medicines refrigerated. So I would think anything that could enhance the continuity of essential services for a community is not going to typically get funded in the rate base. This might be the place to do that.
That's an excellent example.
That's a very, very good point. We talk about community benefit. We have, several things, but she discussed, represents municipalities, and they're generally located in town. We have some towns in our service territory, there's a small town in Grand Oregon, they're their own utility. We don't provide them service, and we'll help them during that and stuff. But they have different ideas when it comes to resiliency, because they don't have any generation. Everything comes from someone else. There's a transmission outage, there's out in control over it. The things that really affect them the most are traffic. There's a lot. Car hit poles affect those folks a lot, and down trees, just physical issues that they face. So but they're a community. So it's just hard for us. It's hard for me a little bit to wrap my mind around community benefit. Is that community in general defined as the most amount of people? Or is that a community defined as folks who are underserved, or folks who are a particular demographic, whether it's economically or socially, or however you define them? Is that also how you define community benefit? Because we're a monopoly, so to speak, because we have a defined service territory. If you move there, that's where you account. So we by definition and by design, we serve everyone who comes. So we're as diverse as the folks who live, and we don't have a lot of control.
Maybe this would be a good time. I know that you've came prepared to talk about projects that could come through this program. If there's no questions that have been lingering on.
There was actually one thing in that I think that we can do with the clarification on the microgrid component. It's still eligible but not recommended at this point. I think it might be helpful to just.
Yeah, I would say eligible but not likely to score well, depending on the final criteria that we establish. So Bill, I don't know if you want to go ahead and describe.
Yeah, we could kind of think wrong, share a half a brain, split it up all the way up here. But we got it. If I had to figure, we have a pretty good SCADA system, but one of the projects we're hoping to do is to make that work robust, because we also have broadband coverage. We have fiber to all of our substations and fiber covering very soon the complete system, so everyone will be able to have access to fiber, just about who wants it. So we want to leverage that and increase our SCADA penetration to control our reclosers in the field. Because we have a lot of reclosures in the field, but not all of them are connected so they can be remotely controlled. So we have to roll, a truck, roll someone out to go up and put that recloser in what we call one shot for fire mitigation. I don't know if that a reclosure works, it'll see a fault. And then based on the current, it will open up and hope that fault clears and then close again. And usually does it 3 times. Because you may have seen, your lights blink a couple times when the power goes out. Or they blink once or twice when the power stays on. Well, what has happened, say a tree or a limb or a car, or whatever, you came in contact with that line, generated a fault current, and either the branch burned through or just fell off. Just it did a strike and fell off. And it clears it, opens back up, and everything's great. Well, during fire season, that's not great. We want to limit the ignition points because we only have control over, the fire current, fuel, air, and ignition. We don't have control over one component, ignition. We've got a really tiny right of way. We do everything we can to control the fuel as much as we can, but really, one thing we have some limited control over even is ignition. So we try to limit the ignition by putting these reclosures in. So as soon as something hits it, they just open up. So that they don't have an option for that limb or that log or tree or, gosh forbid, a car to just sit there and cook. And then eventually you get an ignition. So we want to be able to manipulate those settings more quickly with to be able to remotely enable. But then we also can, now that the fiber drop is there, we can also add more monitoring of conditions. For example, that are getting pretty cagey with weather monitoring and things like that. But we could get a more granular look at what is the current conditions on our system now, so that when we have a weather event or a fire event, we may, instead of just immediately killing a whole feeder, if we have a really long feeder, which we have some do, and the danger area is really only here, we can put that in one shot. We're putting them off as a PSP. It gives us more granular options for PSPs. Just makes our system more manageable and ability to be manipulated remotely without having to drive a truck all the way out there. Because if you have to take trucks and drive them 60 miles to go activate something, it takes a long time. And it can make the PSPS, public safety power truck, is going to be long no matter what. Because we have to patrol, everyone in the industry shaking their head going, yeah, because you have to patrol everything. Because you turn the power off, you can't just turn it back on without starting at the, the end line and working your way out and energizing as you go. Because for all you know, a tree came down, and because everything was off, you didn't get a notice of it, or no one's called in, and you re-energize the power up patrolling the line, then you had the issue you were trying to avoid. So this is one way to kind of help manage those PSPS is better than also just manage our system and provide more reliability. That's a big project we're working on.
I think also the increased SCADA throughout our system gives us, like Phil said, more information. We can tell specifically, okay, a tree hit from this point down versus some of the broader monitoring that we do. We can tell that a tree hit a feeder with our current SCADA system, but the deeper we can get, the more isolated we can isolate where a problem is, a lot faster. And I think particularly wildfire, but it doesn't really have to be wildfire. Anytime you have more information that drills that down faster, maybe faster response to the area where it is, maybe you stopping a fire before it gets going, and you then dispatch a lot quicker, the outages are shorter, it just gives you so much more information, and it gives you also the ability to change feeds in certain circumstances and do things that would shorten that outage up even further than it could be.
Well, it's as anyone in the utility industry has ownership over their system, not just because it's their system, but they also have ownership over their members, their customer base, who their end users are, because they know them, their neighbors, they work in their area, their kids play softball together and stuff. So we're very passionate about making sure that no one gets hurt. And then also there's not a lot of property damage. And we don't want to be working, knock on wood, these things happen. You don't want to be, you want to do everything you can that we do to not contribute to any sort of disaster. That's kind of, we always try to work
Yeah,
towards not doing that.
that's a great example, and it seems like one that could fit within the sort of funding window. If you all are bringing a third batch and this program will bring a few $100,000, then it could probably make a pretty big difference.
Be a difference maker for us.
It would, and it could be a difference maker for the, how broad we go with it. I mean, let's be honest, everybody in the industry is doing a lot of these things now. They're not, we can't afford to wait always on funding, but by doing this, it helps, by getting help from the state and the federal government, it helps us offset some of those costs for ratepayers, whether they're cooperative, IOU, municipality, they're all the same. It all ends up coming down to how much electricity costs.
Yeah.
And, helping to kind of stave off those rate increases is beneficial for everyone, because then the ratepayers have more money. It's better for the economy, frankly, because ratepayers have more money to spend on other things. Or they have money for food, or money for gas, or those kind of things. So we're trying to be very conscious of roads.
Sure. Thanks for
That's,
sharing.
just kind of piggybacking, I think some of the projects are not gonna be like the sexy sort of Odo Community Renewable Grant Program type projects that are really, flashy and, legislators get excited about. I think they're gonna be examples like that's just been given. And I hope that Odo will keep that in mind as you're reviewing and categorizing these things, is that a lot of these are kind of bread and butter things that are expensive, for ratepayers. Even just these fuses, I mean, if you put in a large section, these one shot, they're very, very expensive, and it's my understanding that you have to get rid of them after they're.
Two different, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them you are one use, but then there's also the reclosures. They don't know. But you're right, and there's all kinds of, it's forever and ever, that was called expulsion fuses. And that's what's kind of what it says, it just shoots, it can shoot sparks and fire on that, and we put them all over the place because the goal was always reliability.
Right.
In the utility industry, we've probably I know, only gotten better at maintaining our systems, turning right away, but the environment has changed around us. We've got more fuel than we've ever had. It's drier and hotter. People can argue about what causes it. Doesn't matter to us. It's here. So we have to think about things that we put a bunch of fuses in so that, if we lose this fuse, only 5 people go out. Well, now we have to think about, I don't like that fuse there, and that was part of our fusing study. We went through and looked at every single fuse and design, and we looked at fire danger for that location and decided, I'm just taking that fuse out because it's too dangerous to have there. What we'll do is we'll put a current limiting fuse or a reclosure farther up. So it may affect more people, but it's safer in the long run and there's less likely to property damage. So sometimes reliability and resiliency, it's hard to tell people, they're not the same thing. And then also, as you reduce your liability, it's almost inversely proportional to your reliability to a degree, and it's very hard for us. It's not intuitive for people in the utility business. Our whole focus, 24/7, all the time, is to keep the lights on. Always keep it. Well, it was really hard for us when we started talking about PSPS. First time I heard the word PSPS, was like, well, public safety power shut off. I'm like, why would you do that? That's a crash in your own car. And then you get educated, you learn more, and then, the Paradise Fire happened, and some of these other things happen, you realize, well, and members have a hard time with livestock and diabetic medicine and all those other things. They're useful power, turning power off on purpose for 8 hours. It's good for your wake time, maybe torches. So I think that the more we can do to explain that and why, it's very helpful, but it is what it is. It's reality, and it's what we're all going to do. It's not really there's always a worry about liability, but when you're owned by consumers, it's their liability. They own the system, it's you're protecting their resource. I'm not trying to worry about getting sued. If you sue me, you're suing yourself. We're trying to protect your system so it's there for your kids and grandkids. Maybe I'll get on this.
I'd love to connect something that you just said with what Jennifer said about the CREP projects being kind of flashy and I don't know, I'm gonna quote you, sexy. They're really exciting, and legislators do get really excited about them. Honey is over here smiling, manages that, but I think one thing to connect with what you're saying on this idea of community benefit is helping us think through how to define that community benefit as it relates to what you just described. Such
Right, replacing a wood pole with a steel pole.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it comes down to outcomes. So a community might be very excited about the benefit of having the power on for longer or mitigating some of that historical outage. So they're interested in that outcome. And so communities that maybe are not, versed in the utility business won't feel excited about a pole being replaced, but they would be excited, I think, about the benefit of the outcome of having less outages or having more power availability. But I think we're gonna need some help in figuring out how to define that in a way that's translatable to the legislature and to other folks.
Just to hop on that, I think that's a really tough problem that you just described, because if you put in a solar installation, you can point at, look, we generated 20,000 kilowatt hours. If you never have an outage, you don't realize that you didn't have an outage.
Right.
So it's really tough to make that point and to make it sexy or whatever the term is you want. It's tough because you have something that you can actually point at on one. And like, if we're successful and we mitigate our problem,
Nobody noticed.
nobody knows. How do I prove that you not mitigated? There was no fire because of something that we did. You never get to prove that.
It's hard to prove negative.
Yeah, so it's a tough problem, I think, but truthfully, if we're gonna do our job right, it really, gosh, I hate saying we can't really worry about what we're trying to sell. We gotta worry about the actual thing that we're trying to do. If we're trying to mitigate fire, then, let's do the things that mitigate fire, and if there happens to be less fires, then hopefully we know we're right, but it might be hard proving that to the public.
Sounds like a good way to help message this program. I mean, the PSPS events were devastating to many people, but it gives us a very real point in recent history to say, and that asterisk on the microgrid was all about steering this to these bread and butter utility grid hardening projects. And we've already defined all the benefits with solar and microgrids in the CEDAR program. Now we're focusing on this grid hardening. So I think that'll be a key part of our message, is leveraging the PSPS. And so, yeah, thanks for that example. I know that we had some other folks who were lined up to share.
I think the next slide is kind of a follow-up on that. So
Yeah.
It is, and I just wanted to say too, I don't think we've gotten any questions in the chat that I've seen, but if there is anyone virtually who wanted to comment on that discussion, just wanted to pause for a minute, because they wanted to come off mute or put a comment in the chat.
Sure. There's been a lot of good conversation about CBI and some of the recent work.
What's CBI?
Community benefit
Indicators, I believe.
indicator.
So the Public Utility Commission recommends utilities adopt one CBI for each of the following topic areas: resiliency, health and community well-being, environmental impacts, energy equity, economic benefits. So just alignment between these and then what the program priorities are for grid resilience as well. There's been some conversation around that. But yeah, if anybody would like to come off mute, you're welcome to raise your hand and provide feedback virtually as well.
In the large utility category, is that still public power or the investor and utilities qualify?
For large utilities, it is the 3 IOUs plus Umatilla, as they have recently taught over the Russian.
Eugene?
Well, UM is still installing.
Thank you.
It's 4 billion megawatt hour per year of sales is the kind.
Phil articulated something I think is interesting that,
There's a raised hand, I think, from something. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you take Christina off mute for an opportunity to weigh
I
in?
was beginning to wonder if it was functioning. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, hi Christina.
Hi, this is Christina Medina calling in from Pacific Corp. Thanks for the opportunity to kind of be in this space with you. We're very enthusiastic about any conversations around community benefits, particularly when we're talking about finding opportunities to calibrate and reach shared understanding around them. So, I put in the chat some reference to some order numbers that really are a bit of our guiding light in the state of Oregon. Obviously, they're born from HB 2021, and they're really elements that serve, the clean energy plan, and really making sure that as we adapt for the future, that we are trying to mitigate any harmful impacts to the communities that we serve. And so a good amount of work for us here at the utility is really spent in creating the spaces for, genuine and meaningful input from our customers and communities and through advisory groups. And we've actually developed quite a few. And in those advisory groups, we're able to kind of bring forward maybe some fundamental approaches in each one of these categories that we've listed here as CBIs as a starting point by which we might build out, what might be a longer strategy to even more enhanced and meaningful outcomes. What would be incredibly helpful is if there was a greater alignment from the smaller, utility groups that are not necessarily beholden to this legislation, for them to actually kind of start to maybe see some of these CBIs and see these areas, because we are in stakeholder groups where there's a significant delta between, what we're offering and delivering relative to CBIs and what kinds of outcomes we're looking to deliver compared to basically what feels like no expectation for, municipal utilities at this point. And so we are having community members that are maybe receiving services from those municipals that are saying, hey, I want to be a part of the system. I want greater equity. I have some concerns. I want to be a part of some of these things, but they can't experience that type of equity. So I think if I were to surface any opportunity, I think that is one where we might have some level setting there. And then two, with respect to the resilience topic, which is obviously top of mind for many of us, we clearly understand that there's a real challenge with regard to, communities living in the last mile, climate impacts and other things, air quality and whatnot. But resilience hubs are obviously top of mind for a lot of communities. We think there's some initiatives there in that space. But really, when we start to have that conversation in community, we start off with the basics, measuring outages, the frequency and duration. We start to build those into our maps. And then we overlay census tract data. And then also we start to include our own survey information. So we're really starting to try to find ways to get enough of a lens to make a decision that's going to be more impactful and to foster greater equity in our communities. And it's been a great process for us. It's challenged us to think outside of the normal operating or the past operating processes and systems. And I think it's been really healthy. It's challenged us to receive feedback from community members and try to understand whether or not it is something that can be used to be to force or drive an adaptation in the way we approach things. And also it builds I think a robust internal community here at PAC where we have greater empathy and understanding for our customers. For example, we don't typically call them ratepayers anymore. So we're very thoughtful about our approach with our communities. And anyway, it's part of a larger narrative. So anything we can do to support the efforts here, whether it be meeting separately to share some of our approaches, we're happy to do it. Sorry about the ramble, but it's an important topic for us.
I guess I might just give a counterpoint on that. We're not, as COUs, we're not subject to the PUC's oversight and the community energy plan requirements of House Bill 2021. So, our local governing boards work with our communities on these topics. So, I guess I'll offer that as a counterpoint. We're happy to look at, some of the thinking that's going on over at the PUC, and we do on occasion, but I would not want the Department of Energy to make standards for this program comparable to what the IOUs have to do, because that doesn't necessarily work for us. So I just put that out there.
Well, I would echo that. I think the thing to keep in mind too is the scale. Comparing, they're so much larger than we are. They have the resources and the capabilities and the staffing to be able to do something which not able to do. Not for lack of wanting to do some of these programs. We're very small, and we refer our members as members because they own us, and we do call them ratepayers. It also helps to remind us they're the ones who are paying the bills. But it's not meant to be negative. It's easier when you're in a discussion like this for members, customers, ratepayers to use a generalized term. But it's just different. It's, Christina brings up a lot of great points, and we probably do have some members that want to be involved in some of the things that maybe like a or like these very large utilities are able to do that. We just don't have the kind of pull.
Yeah, no,
But it is something we recognize, and then we are working those directions to get better at that. We don't fall under the same guidelines either.
yeah. I think, they go through a very rigorous process. And in some cases, the IOUs blaze a trail we can all learn from. Some cases, it just doesn't relate. So I think we'll keep that in mind as we go.
And they're great partners. I mean, as far as we love, our local office in Roseburg, half of our line there work here and vice versa. And we love working with Pacific Road, great work with. We work together and Sam Carter down in Roseburg, work with him for great folks. I don't want anybody, we're just different.
So I know that Gail Malcolm is with us, and she had a really great project that I was hoping to hear from Gail. And we'll move this along to get to the actual criteria.
There's two other Philip Henrys too.
Two other people. Okay, so let's go for 3 more stories, 5 minutes max, and then we can move on.
This is Brooke. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So I will drop into the chat how PGE has taken a look at the CBIs that Christina was talking about. This is an iterative process. So, as we continue to engage with our community and the PUC and other stakeholders, this will continue to evolve. But I think to the point that some of the COUs were talking about in terms of scale and scope and how do you operationalize that, there are some good, I think, lessons in terms of, some of those smaller things that may be able to be incorporated as smaller utilities are looking that aren't, big, large scale, monumental things that take a lot of staff time. So I will drop that into the chat. And just for kind of awareness purposes, I wanted to briefly touch on the workforce development side of things. And that's something that we've really taken as a priority for us and really looked at ways in which we can help build the workforce pipeline and really leverage, the projects that we are doing. So for projects, obviously, our own workforce is doing some of the projects. When we contract out, we're looking at things like requiring prevailing wage and looking at apprentice utilization, thinking through ways in which we can partner with pre-apprenticeship programs. We have our own pre-apprenticeship program for linemen, and then looking at other partnerships with other pre-apprenticeship programs. So thinking a little bit broader beyond just the actual project that you're working on, but working in a more cohesive way for how we can build the workforce pipeline, because that benefits community in a broader and a more long-term way. So PGE also convened a statewide coalition last year around building the Clean Energy Workforce Coalition, and I'm happy to follow up with anybody who would like more information on that. Some of you on the call and in the room are participating in that, but I'll put my information down as well. So just wanted to throw that little plug in about kind of thinking broader about workforce broadly.
Thank you, Brooke.
Be back.
Can you guys hear us? Okay. I heard you guys.
Oh, yeah. We're on.
Thanks, Nick.
Well, Stacy, would it be possible to pivot over to Gail and give her an opportunity to speak to the group on this?
Hi. I was hoping to be there in person, but I ran into a car accident and I got turned around, so I'm on the side of the road someplace safe. So in terms of Central Lincoln's, one of the projects we had thought about was something we call the Cape Perpetua project, and it's a 14-mile stretch of distribution and fiber line that runs on the ridge above Highway 101. So it gets a lot of wind in the winter, and it's in the Siuslaw National Forest, and it's in the Cape Perpetua Scenic Area, and it's high up, and to get to most of the sections of the line, we have to helicopter in or get there by foot when we have an outage. And we do have outages on that particular line because it's so exposed. So we're wanting to do a joint project with Pioneer, who is also running fiber and uses our poles, and moving all that infrastructure down to Highway 101 underground. So it's an undergrounding project on its face, but there's lots of community benefits. And first of all, we'd be moving the distribution and fiber lines out of the National Forest and the scenic area. It returns, where we do have roads, it returns that habitat and public lands to its original use. It eliminates the risk of wildfire and storm-related outages. It'll certainly enhance reliability of the electric and communication systems that serve those rural communities up and down the Central Oregon coast. And then it adds a resilient fiber path for regional internet providers, for local, state, federal entities, including 911, Lincoln County Emergency Services, U.S. Forest Service. And, you know, we kind of look at this as tangible benefits. In other words, those that the community can easily see, and then some of the intangibles. And, you know, when we have an outage on this line, it might be out for 7-8 days. And at that point, they don't have internet. You know, some of those, the homeschoolers are there, the remote clinics are there without power after so many days, no matter how much diesel you might have for the generator. And so, so there's lots of community benefits there. And then if we do underground this, you know, and do it in conjunction with Pioneer, it runs about $350,000 without our labor per mile. And someone was talking earlier about how expensive it is to underground. So it's about $600,000 to underground a mile, and which is why we haven't done it to date. But it's something we would do sooner than later if we have those funds available. The other piece is on this, in the scenic area and in this tourist area, we're kind of concerned about this whole business of NEPA, and I guess you guys will get to that later. But for small utilities who are inexperienced with dealing with NEPA and stuff, we would be looking for some guidance there.
Thank you, Gail. Yeah, that's a great example, and I'm glad you brought this one up because it's an expensive undergrounding project, but it's one where you have an opportunity to share cost with another service in the same forum, you know, so.
Can you just do part of it? I mean, can you break it into segments? I mean, that sounds like a humongous, I mean, it would take up all the funds available.
Right. Oh, no, we have it broken up right now into 6 segments, as a matter of fact. You know, so it just, in the years we can get the funding, then it happens, and in the years we don't, it might slow us down, or it just depends. It'll depend on the rate year, you know, and what else we have going on. But it's something we need to do. It's too difficult, and these people have, you know, and their outages, you know, beyond a week is just too much anymore, especially with the, you know, after going through COVID and having all their communications go down, having 911 go down. This is a main fiber line between the north and south central coast. And so it's like between Newport and Florence. And so when you lose communication there, you lose all of it, and everybody loses it. And so it's a concern.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. And it touches on one of the things we mentioned in the narrative, which is for utilities to be in contact with the local jurisdiction, county, city, to see if there's any other things that can benefit at the same time as a project. If you're opening a trench, is there anything else that can be done in that trench? If there's pole work, can it be combined with some other project to reduce traffic impacts from 2 projects down the line? Things like that. These are the types of benefits that we're hoping to pull out here. So if there's no one else, we can move on to our competitive selection discussion. No more hands raised.
I think in the interest of time, if there are any comments or additional thoughts in the chat, please put them in the chat. If we have time at the end, we'll go and revisit them, but that will move on to the next section.
Yeah. Okay, and as we launch into this discussion, Gail mentioned help with federal guidelines. And we've actually, worked with Haggerty to develop some Q&A documents on NEPA and Davis Bacon, and those are available as handouts in the room and as PDFs for those who are not with us in person. We also have probably 20 slides at the end of this presentation that we're not going to actually get to today, but they're there as a resource to help guide through some of these federal funding requirements. So,
may I also add to, if, you know, after reviewing these slides or going through the FAQs, if there are still outstanding questions that you have, you can still reach out to us. We can still provide guidance on that. So if you find anything missing, we can work with you on individual questions as well.
yeah, that's one of the areas where we as a state agency hope to provide some support, because I know there's a lot of strings attached with federal money, and we want to help utilities navigate these funds to be able to use them. So, but moving on, We're proposing a competitive review grant program, very similar to what we do with the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program. That has an application and review process that leads us to a performance agreement, which is really the contract. And at that time, we go into construction, and there's a period of federal reporting, invoicing and payments until we wrap up the project. So this is a schematic view of what we're proposing for this program. For those who have submitted into the CREP program, this would look pretty familiar. And again, this CREP program is a complementary program that does, as Jennifer said, the sexy projects. And this one gets it out. This one is about the bread, butter, grid reliability. So, next slide.
What is the time? Do they have to be done within the 5 years of the federal program, or what's the time for completion on, or is there one? I mean,
Yeah, so the initial guidance is that we're gonna have a 5-year period of performance from the date that we've negotiated our award. And then once we go through our sub-granting process, that'll leave about 4 years to do the actual project. There is word that there's potential for that to be extended, especially as these future funding cycles come through, so it could be up to 10 years.
okay.
So are you gonna show us like a real calendar about when you think this is starting?
We don't have a calendar today. Right now, we're just waiting for the federal feedback on our application, which we expect sometime second half of the summer. Ideally, we would be making our first awards in 24, but we don't have an exact date yet because the feds are really overwhelmed trying to get all the funds flowing. So we can't provide dates yet, but I wish we could. So here we have essentially 3 categories that are just proposed at this point. This is similar to what we do in the CREP program. One group of criteria that are around project readiness and technical viability. Really, we need to have technically sound projects from the get-go. So we propose 50% of the scoring weight for project readiness and technical viability. Another 45% for these community benefits that can lift the projects that have these benefits. On first screen background. And then finally, a small piece we are proposing for geographic and technological diversity within the program. And so right now, just in this table, we showed that as 5%. But it's just a starting point. And what we would really like to do is talk about specific key criteria in the program within these categories or other categories, if we decide we need additional categories. Once we get the slides back up and running, we have the selection criteria for the construction grants within the CREP program, if we wanted to look at a few. Or if we would rather start with blank slate, we could do that too. And I would just put that question to the room. If you want to see some of the criteria that we've already developed, as an example, we could do that. See some. All right, so we'll go very quickly through some.
Can you clarify the COU versus the IOUs? Everyone's going to be in this same pot, or are COUs being scored against other COUs and the IOUs are going to be scored with, like in the competitive ranking?
Right now, we see it as a single pot.
A single pot, okay.
And that would enable us to move funds between the 2 pots. And so if we didn't get competitive projects from the IOUs, maybe going after some other federal grants, we could move that money over into the COU pot and have ideally the same criteria being applied to both utility types. And in this program, it's not COU, IOU, it's small and large. But
Right,
effectively,
right, I get it, yeah.
probably moved down. So that's what we would propose, for everybody to have the same criteria and be competitively scored against each other, but with these budget targets for how we distribute the funding. So here we have essentially the technical viability criteria within the CREP program. Strength of project team, We want to see that there is an experience for developing similar projects. Operations plan, how are you going to maintain and operate a project? And again, these are focused towards microgrids and solar, so it's not a perfect carryover. We want to have the project adequately described within the application, so there's no question as to the project that's getting funded. If it's a $20 million project and you're asking for 800,000, we would like to see that you've got the rest of the financial stack figured out. So that's our financial plan, construction plan, you know, when they're going to start, how long will it take to construct? These are the type of information we would like to have to see that we have effectively a fully baked project coming into the program, can complete the performance period. Next slide. These are moving on to some of the equity pieces that we have within the CREF program. And again, this is a whole lot that goes into a single criteria that points in that program. We want to see that there's been essentially community engagement with these projects to bring the community into the discussion and see exactly how these benefits can flow out to the community. Within the CREF, if you're doing something like a resilience hub, there may be more opportunity to have this community discussion than something like new fuses out on these.
Yeah, that's what
I was just struggling with that.
Yeah.
They don't even know what I'm talking about.
And they don't
They
care.
don't care. It's all.
So, I mean, we've heard about how, the different COUs, like the municipal utilities have a lot of, close partnerships with the city, that it seems like there might already be like a networked effect in, some of the COUs. So like for your board, for example, how often do they meet? Who comes to those meetings? I mean, I imagine community members come to those meetings. And curious about like, do they talk about fuses there? I mean.
We have a lot of communities, members who come, our board members are all members of the community. You know, the board's job is to set policy and tell the organization. They don't lay it down in the minutiae. We explain to them, you know, what we're doing, what our long-term plans are, and large-scale capital projects and things like that. But they, at least for us, boards don't typically get involved in the day-to-day operations of what goes on.
I would just urge a lot of flexibility on this point and allow the applicant to describe the community benefit and not have rigorous requirements about how we go about demonstrating community benefit. I mean, if we can provide a good description of what benefit comes to the community without saying that we've held, you know, a bunch of community meetings about fuses and steel poles, I mean, I think that should govern. I don't think some of this stuff makes sense.
Yeah, so before we heard about essential services, we could have a separate criteria. Project provides enhanced reliability to.
Right.
Whatever, that could be a specific criteria that earns points that you don't have to talk about fuse, but it brings the benefit. So I think that's.
I think it comes into more of an outcomes-based piece.
Exactly.
Like preventing up, you know, and like that might be something that comes up in your meeting.
And we do that. Well,
I would think that things, similar to we're talking about the partnerships that we have with our emergency management folks. If we could get letters of support, we can explain what the community benefit to them particularly, and on the grant application, we can describe what the community benefit is. But then if we have the groups, the fire stations, the emergency management folks, hospitals, you name it, write letters of support for particular, I think that would help in the grading. If you were considering the community impact, that a hospital saying, well, they're trying to make this line that serves me more resilient, then I think that should have some weight.
Yeah, so getting at those emergency services, service, and another one that we talked about briefly in the narrative is just communication with either the county or the city. Because that opens up certain channels of discussion that might bring some added value. Another one that's very clear within the federal guidelines is, does it serve a community that's highlighted or otherwise defined as a disadvantaged community?
And I think you're gonna get to them now.
Yeah, we do get to that a little bit later. It's pretty far down, so, we can go there if we want to. But so, yeah, that's three right there: emergency services, communication with local jurisdiction, and serving a disadvantaged community. And those could be stacked up in a table, and we could give them 10 points each, and that's 30% of the points for a project.
It's been pointed out by several of the utility folks that the customers really don't care about the fuses or the circuits or the SCADA. As Richie said, it's the outcomes. You know, will I still have drinking water? Will I still have sanitation? Will there be a place for warming and cooling and food preparation? You know, can medicines be chilled? You know, those are the kind of outcome metrics that typically don't fall under the PUC, but it could make a big difference in this.
Well, and I think the other thing you have to keep in mind is the governance structure of Douglas Electric, which is governed by a board of directors, democratically elected from these small communities. I mean, they're representing those areas. And if the board endorses that project that Douglas submit, you know, that's tacit sort of community outreach, right? I mean, these people are elected by those people to serve.
Ours are city council.
Yeah, they're the people that are elected to sort of like, so they don't have to get involved in fuses, but you know, the board of directors is involved in that. They will be briefed on this. I suspect they will vote on it, endorse the project. So I mean, I think you have to look that's the way they're governed. They don't do this on their own.
And that way, community, you know, the COUs have a leg up in one way, in that if these are all board-driven decisions, or city hall, or however they get to it, that there's a community.
Right.
What we want is criteria that differentiate between COU, IOU. If every COU has this board, how does this one project score higher or lower from another? Is what we need to get to with the criteria. And I think we're getting some examples here. And we want to hear about the fuses too. That's in the technical.
You didn't do that.
Yeah, that's the first thing.
Beat you to death in front of us.
Yeah, no, out the reclosers and the shooters and all of that.
Where Bob has been drowned in.
It's fine.
All right, so maybe we go down to the next slide. It's so some of these are pretty specific to that program, which was, I mean, those of you who are familiar with the CREP program, it was very tightly defined by the legislature. And so a lot of these come right out of the legislative language. So again, these are just presented as examples, and we really do have the right to say. It looks like energy resilience aspects. Yeah, I think that we'll certainly have to have a subset of criteria that are right around the equity requirements within the federal guidelines for the disadvantaged communities. Justice bodies and the partners who been that into it. So, and you know, after these open houses, we will be able to go back, put together a draft version of some criteria and share it back out with the group. This isn't our last choice to discuss this.
Yeah, just ask, I heard a comment that one of these was liked. Which letter was it that you liked?
Oh, J.
J, okay. And if there are ones that you like or dislike and even just want to throw out a letter so that we have that feedback, we can kind of take these ones as well.
Yeah, so that's our critical facilities. And that one there's a lot of points in the CRAP as well. Maybe we go to the next slide. Again, some of these are a little more focused on that program. There's some economic development discussions, local jobs. We recognize that for a lot of the consumer-owned utilities, it'll be their own crews, and that's an opportunity to bring action. So maybe these projects should be. We also have geographic diversity and technological diversity, not representing a lot of points, but this is kind of how we proposed it for this program as well. We could even bump this up. I mean, we really want to see the money flow all over the state.
Under economic development, the City Club study on top of the energy resilience plan pointed out that there are many, many small businesses that won't be able to survive without certain essential services. So that could be an economic development aspect of, you know, the ability to keep small businesses operating during disasters. It's not your normal economic development criteria, but in this case, it might be.
Yeah, survival. Survival.
If they can't process a credit card, they can't stay in business.
So is the last one like different types of resilience projects? Like you don't want all reconductoring things being submitted, or what is that getting at?
Well, this again was from the CRAP, and it was trying to diversify beyond just solar to bring some points to other technologies. But in this program, it could be, you know, show us some fuses and some reconductoring and some underground if you can afford it, and if there's value to that, you know.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, I think that should be defined by the utility. You know, that they're gonna put forward their highest and best project. It doesn't, I don't think that that's relevant, I guess, is what I would say.
I mean, I would kind of echo that as well, because the point of the diversity of technology was to keep it out of only solar. We use eliminated solar as an option already. So that doesn't really make any sense, in my opinion. I'd rather see.
If it was all fuses, that would be okay with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not?
Go fuses.
That's just my opinion.
Well, if a lot of people are seeing the same thing as their biggest source of risk.
Right.
You want to chase the risk.
Want to address that, yeah.
Right, you don't want to just say, well, no, we know that's the biggest source of risk, but this other stuff here.
Somebody already has that.
Right, someone's already doing that.
All right, so maybe we eliminate the diversity of technology, put it all in the geographic diversity. And again, these are 5% of the total points that we had in this category. In this program, and what we proposed, we could say 5% if you're, and we could come up with some way to say, this county only has one, then they get 5 points. Or if this county has 5, each one gets 1 point, and try to spread it out in that way.
I think that's a valid argument to have, because let's face it, Oregon, all of our populations along the I-5 corridor. But there's a whole lot of utilities outside of the I-5 corridor, so I think it's good to have part of the project geographic diversity be represented, so the folks that Oregon Trail Electric or Hunting and Lake County, or just folks who are far away, still get it by the top.
Yeah.
How about utility type, you know, co-op, muni, PUD, IOU? Would that be something to consider in terms of, instead of just geography, maybe utility type?
Yeah, we could include that. Try to spread it around to all the different utility types.
Although some COUs have more wildfire exposure than others as well, so that's.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, is me, I would try to do as much of this as risk-based. Do we aim at projects that may land in an area without very much risk versus ignore an area that has a lot more risk?
They're different types though. I mean, like, some of the cities are gonna be more impacted by ice storms or,
Yeah.
you know,
Absolutely.
things like that, so, yeah. But I agree, it should be risk-based.
I think that would be part of the maintenance, is okay, if you be impacted by ice storms.
Could a criteria be leverage of other programs, like, you know, by doing this, Douglas is able to, you know, support the CREP initiative, or something that shows that it, you know, you're.
There's a cascading effect.
Yeah.
This project also contributes to not only grid resiliency, but sanitation, freshwater, kind of, not to be communications, those kind of things as well.
Increases the throw weight of the program.
So the previous slide is at G. Financial statements and virtually investments. Does that make sense?
This is more conceptual as opposed to crunchy numbers, you know, I mean, just being able to express that you're, you know, the cascading benefit of work, you know, enabling, it's an enabler for this other program, or this other initiative might be.
I think capturing that's valid, because a lot of times we have a tendency to get tunnel vision. You think about this is how it's affecting our system and our members, ratepayers, customers, and forget about, until you have wide disaster attachment. I couldn't talk to anybody where, you know, there's no water. So we kind of leveraging all that stuff.
So you mentioned addressing the highest risk first, and those hazards that are most probable first. And are there criteria that we can put together that can help us say that this risk in this utility is higher or lower than this risk in another? We've already, you know, we started with just wildfire, and then we branched it out because we heard wind and ice actually ranked higher than wildfire in our RFI, the request we put out to utilities. So, you know, is there a way that we can try to get at a quantitative scale of risk across different applications?
I think one of the things too is the population impacts. I mean, you know, if all the power goes out in a city, you know, that's more people, you know, that are impacted. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can look at risk.
Population and maybe a historical look at outages.
That's one of the things I saw in your application was the historic outages.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, the population issue that could be significant. I mean, if all the power goes down in Portland, it's different than if it goes out in Burns or.
So maybe a criteria could be number of people served by improved resilience from the project. And we wouldn't want to punish those really rural areas.
Right.
Well, that sounds like what you will do.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you
Maybe
put
I
it-
think you're exploring like.
And I'm not gonna minimize people in Burns as opposed to Portland. I don't, you know, I represent the people in Portland.
No, but I'm just saying, there's other factors than just pure
Yeah.
risk of
Sure,
the
about, yeah, develop.
Well, I agree with that. I was at a meeting very similar to this where someone, so in the city said, I haven't had an outage in 3 months. And I was like, well, we haven't had an outage on our system in 3 minutes. So I mean, there is.
We're joking. It's really stable.
Yeah, I was joking, it was actually 3 hours at the time. It was true, it was 3 hours. And I just think if you can recognize that somehow, in the matrix, you know.
One benchmark might be what Central Lincoln PUD did, and it's a process described in FEMA and other academic stuff, but, you know, hazards analysis, vulnerability assessment, risk identification, prioritization, and risk management. And that's what Lincoln PUD did as they realized they had all their fleet down by the airport, which was in the tsunami zone and was going to be, you know, separated by the bridge. So, you know, they distributed their service fleet to the areas that were going to be, you know, still able to respond. So, I mean, there is a process that Lincoln PUD exercised, and Adam Schultz from DOE was involved with.
Like a proper thyroid.
That's good.
Threats,
Yeah, maybe there's a way, go ahead.
I was just thinking back on an earlier slide, as part of the application, well, the applicants need to describe how they prioritize that project, so that might get us the best factors.
What's the criteria that can describe vulnerability within a service territory? Is there, or maybe it's multiple criteria, and that gets to both the risk and, again, the disadvantage to the.
I think it'd be great to just have a checklist. Have they described that? You know what I mean? Rather than having a score per se. And I know that there's a risk of the judgment that comes into that. But I mean, I just think there's just so many diverse utilities and vulnerabilities, and I just think you should allow the utility to describe how they think that is met. And you know, just have a check.
Yeah.
Have they done that?
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry, I don't want to break into this really phenomenal conversation, but we are at time, and so I just want to be respectful of everyone, especially our virtual folks who are listening in and they have other things to get to. So I know we do have a couple last steps. If there are comments on this conversation that anyone virtually still would like to comment on, please put it in the chat. We will record this. This doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. We can follow up. This is, you know, there's still opportunities for feedback. So I will pass this to Emily, I think, to just kind of help run this.
I think that Rob.
Okay, we'll move to what's next and close this out.
See all the slides that are in there, so slide 56 is one.
Yeah, you'll get a quick tour of how much information is available to everyone as well.
Yeah, and I think with what's next, and we've got a lot of great ideas today, so thank you for, you know, I think this got us to a point where we can at least start putting together this matrix of scoring criteria. I think that, you know, we want to stay in touch. What we have, if you want to see the program narrative that we submitted, it's on our website. When we get the program up and running, if you've signed up for the emails, you will be notified of progress. I think that we will also do some follow-up from these meetings to keep those, you know, keep us all engaged in this discussion. To look at how these criteria start stacking up, we'll probably be able to share a draft for comment, get thoughts on how this goes. We've got some good direction here, but ultimately we need the ability for some competitive review committee to be able to differentiate these projects. And so we'll share that development process with you all. And obviously, when we do an opportunity announcement, that criteria will be part of the announcement. So it's very clear for utilities how the score points within the application. With that, I think I would just say thank you all for coming, and we can hang around for discussion afterwards. And thank you for everyone online. I hope that you're able to survive our technology challenges. Thanks for sticking with us.
And we're gonna have the same exact meeting tomorrow, except in Warm Springs, but virtual attendees if you wanted to attend again, or anybody on Zoom again.
That's a great point. If you have any brilliant ideas in the middle of the night, join us tomorrow.
Yeah, in fact, go to slide 59 and it has Rob's contact information.
Thank you guys for putting this on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You mentioned checklists. Big organizations have